So good morning, my name is Jermaine Johnson. I'm the Regional President for PNC Bank here in Greater Washington and also in Virginia. As Doug mentioned, we are super excited to be the sponsor of the series Lessons in Leadership with Leadership Greater Washington. I want to say congratulations to all of you LGW alum and for those that are in the class today. It's super exciting to have us involved. Sonia McCormick's actually on the board. I have to give her a shout out. And as Doug mentioned, this is our 20th anniversary here as PNC here in the Greater Washington market, so we're super excited about that. Before I get started, I wanted to say thank you to Arvind. This is also our 20th year of being the summer season sponsor of Wolf Trap. And so we recently signed up for a new 4-year agreement, thanks to Arvind and all the great work that you're doing. So another congratulations for that relationship.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, so why don't we get started? I know you didn't come here to see me, we came here to see Arvind and to talk about him. I thought I would start off by saying it's been 10 years, over 10 years that you've been at Wolf Trap. Time goes by really, really fast.
Yeah.
But let's talk about your time before you got to Wolf Trap. So where did you grow up?
Before I answer that, I want to also say thank you to everyone. Thank you for having me. Thank you to PNC. Thank you to LGW. It's an honor to be here. I grew up in Ohio. I was born and raised in Northeast Ohio. I was born in Ravenna, Ohio, which is actually, if you are familiar with that part, so at least one person here is familiar.
I've been there.
You've been to Ravenna. Ravenna is a very, very small town, but it's next door to Kent, Ohio, where Kent State University is located. And my father was teaching at Kent at that time, and my mother was doing her PhD at Kent at the time.
Oh, wow.
So they were very, I grew up in that kind of collegiate environment.
And do you have siblings?
I have an elder brother, who's 7 years older than I am.
And does your brother, is he still in Ohio or is he, where is he now?
No, my brother lives outside Boston. He's lived there for less than 10 years. He moved there after I moved to the East Coast. You know, we're 7 years apart, so we had a very close relationship, but it was almost like third parent as opposed to, you know, peer. We were never in the same school or anything like that. He's lived all over the world. He and his wife are both, they both were in the automotive sector, and so he is no longer in Ohio.
Okay. Yeah, my brother and I are 5 years apart. And my mom always says we're like two only kids. You know, like, so when I was in high school, he was still in middle school. When I was off to college, he was in high school, so I totally get it.
Yeah.
So where did you go post Ohio? I understand you were at Cornell.
Yeah, so when I left high school, I went to Cornell for undergrad. I was there, obviously, well, not obviously, but I was there 4 years. I did the regular term.
You were on the 5-year plan?
I wasn't on the 5-year plan. I wasn't on the 3-year plan either. I was on the regular term. After Cornell, I went to England for graduate school at Cambridge University. I was a Marshall Scholar, which is a wonderful scholarship program that affords young people with the opportunity to study anywhere in the UK. And I chose to study at Cambridge University, and I was there for 2 years. After that, interestingly, in the sense that, you know, my educational background was very, very kind of traditional liberal arts, humanities, really heavy focus on literature, theater, philosophy, history.
And that was at Cornell, or that was at
both?
Both. Okay.
Yeah. But then, after I left England, or as I was leaving England, I had an opportunity to start a career at McKinsey, and I did that in LA. So I moved from Cambridge to Los Angeles, which was in many ways a bigger jump than moving from Ithaca, New York to Cambridge.
Yeah. Yeah, I was going to ask, so which was more different, leaving Ohio to go to New Jersey or New Jersey to go to LA?
Ohio to New York.
Okay.
Ohio to New York was a big shift just because I think anyone who's leaving their home and going from home environment to college environment is inevitably going to be a huge shift and a huge change. And like I said, I grew up in a pretty small town near where I was born, and so it had all of the small town pros and cons, but you know, there were cons as well. So I think going to undergraduate, like it does for so many 18-year-olds, 17-year-olds, it kind of opens your brain up pretty quickly, immediately. In that sense, moving to England was also heavily impactful and influential. I mean, it was still collegiate to collegiate environment, but I always tell younger people, if you have a chance to have an international experience before the age of, pick a number, 25, 28, 30, take it, because it's so eye-opening in ways that you couldn't understand. And I loved that experience of being totally outside my element, you know, and having to figure a lot of things out again. You know, you think you know a lot and then you realize you don't know anything. But then, of course, the change to LA, you know, going from a very, very small, ancient, academic town like Cambridge, England, which really, you know, Oxford, Cambridge, these are very ancient towns and they have very, very, very old traditions. And it's a very, I mean, it's the kind of typically ivory tower context. Then to move to Los Angeles, where, you know, it's obviously a very big city, but LA is the opposite of tradition in the sense that there are no ancient traditions in LA. There's not even 25-year-old traditions in LA, which I thought was fantastic, and I'm a big
So going
big
to LA,
fan.
was that not your choice, or?
No, that was absolutely my choice.
Okay.
I was finishing up in England. I was going through the recruitment process for McKinsey, and the international recruitment all came out of London. And at the third interview stage, the third round, I should say, they told me you have to pick the city that you want to eventually work, because that's where you need to be interviewed by those partners. And I will admit that I picked LA because it was the furthest place from England that was in America. I knew I had to work in America for visa reasons and you know, legal employment reasons. I didn't think I was going to get the job on any level. I had heard that they fly you business class on this interview. And I thought, I might never fly business class again in my life, so what will be the longest flight from Cambridge? I had never been to California. I had never been to LA, of course. I had never really thought about living in California. It never really occurred to me. I didn't have that dream as a child. But I thought, well, this will be a really good, and it was February, and I remember that because the weather was terrible in England, and it would have been really good to be in a nice sunny climate. And so I went to LA, and obviously ended up getting the job, and I didn't think LA, I didn't know what to think. I didn't really have a sense of whether that was going to be a good experience for me, just from a living perspective. And I remember a partner telling me in the first couple months, when I was expressing a little bit of, I think, stereotypical doubt that people have when they move to LA for the first time. And he said, just give it 2 years and you'll never leave here. And I was like, really? And he said, no. And I didn't stay there forever, of course, but it was almost 2 years to the day after I moved that I thought, wow, I could really live here for the rest of my life.
So you really like taking risk. I mean, you went to school internationally, then you leave Cambridge to go all the way across the country, across the pond, and then out to LA. What was the driving force between you taking this kind of risk, especially at such a young age?
The risk in LA was somewhat less about the LA component, but was really more about the professional side of that. I mean, I was not somebody that had a lifelong ambition to be a management consultant. I did not grow up in that context or in that world, and I was learning about it through the process of being recruited. I was really heavily involved, in my mind anyway, in an academic context in the arts. You know, that's where I thought my future might be. I didn't know exactly how or what, but I thought it might be in that area. So doing something like working at McKinsey was actually the much bigger risk, and I didn't know what to expect, but that was part of what was attractive to me. The idea of taking a portion of time to put yourself in a context that was totally different from everything you already knew. That I did understand, even at that age, was something that would be good for me. And I think there have been 2 or 3 times since then where I've made really abrupt changes for kind of the same reason. You know, there's a part of me that gets to a point where I think I need to have a totally different experience.
Yeah.
That's not always going to be professionally. I mean, that's not very practical as you get older, but there are other ways to change up your life in a kind of abrupt way, and I try to do that from time to time.
So whenever I hear McKinsey, I immediately, for me, I think of a sexy consulting firm that's an international brand. What type of companies were you calling on? What exactly were you doing while you were at McKinsey?
I did specialty retail. I was assigned at an early age to a specialty retail project, and one of the partners on that project was kind of a legend in that world, and I learned a lot. I learned a lot about a type of retail that I knew very little about prior to that. I'd worked on a couple of other clients, entertainment, because we were in LA, and so there were a lot of entertainment clients and business that we were doing. I had a short stint in grocery, which was kind of adjacent to the retail side, which is how I got put on that. So it's a little bit of a mix.
And were your clients, were they LA based or were they outside of California?
For the most part, they were LA based, and so I was not leading the stereotypical 4 days a week, traveling life, the Sunday through Thursday life. I generally was at home almost every day. I mean, I wasn't really at home because I was at the office 24 hours a day, but I was in the city. One of my projects for 4 months was in London, so I did get a chance to go back to England in a different context.
Okay. Working 80-hour weeks?
Sometimes.
To start, yeah?
Yeah, I was not the world's greatest consultant. I was not leading that pack. I had been in academic environments where I generally was near the top of the pack. I mean, if I can say that humbly. That was not my experience at McKinsey, but I think it was the perfect first job, because I think that there was aspects of that job that I was so out of my depth, and I had to learn so quickly, which is why I don't think I was at the top of anybody's league table. But the things you learned as a young person about how to work and quality of work and serving clients and what that means, that obligation of being available to work very, very hard because you're actually responsible to this client relationship. That was really important.
Did you experience any kind of any moments of failure or embarrassment? Like, I can remember when I was an analyst, when I started my career, and I studied for a year in Charlotte. I won't tell you which bank because it's a competing institution, but there was a lot of things that I was outside of my depth when I was there. I can only imagine. Since it sounds like you were mostly into arts, liberal arts background, there were likely financial related activities that you were involved in that may have been a little bit new to you.
100%. I mean, there was so much I didn't know. And it's not like they didn't know what I didn't know. I mean, they clearly had a sense of who I was, and they maybe still had a very robust program of education for those of us who are coming from a non-MBA background. And there were a number of folks, not so much with my background, they're mostly MDs and JDs who were, and PhDs in the sciences that were being recruited. But they did have a kind of a program for the kind of financial literacy that we would need or potentially need. But I didn't know anything. I mean, I was younger than almost everybody in my associates class, because I didn't have any break between education and going back to education. I didn't have that in-between period of industry experience. So I was a little bit younger. I was immature in that sense, and there was tremendous amounts of information that most of the other associates had. Most of the other analysts had them, because most of the analysts were, finance background and coming to help the associates. And I knew less than they did about a lot of things, which was, a dynamic that was a little bit unusual. But I think, like all things, you learn from that. I was lucky that I had 2 mentors that really took an interest in helping harness, I think, the parts of what I did know how to do and did well for the clients and for the company's best interest, and then working with me on the parts that I didn't have. I was not the complete picture by any stretch, but there were things clearly that I was able to do. There was a reason they hired me, but there were big kind of practical gaps of information that I had to learn very quickly. So did I feel like a failure all the time, particularly in the beginning? Like, I really felt like I had to overcome a tremendous deficit of information and jargon and language and just a style. But that was part of the learning experience. I think that absolutely formed. I wasn't at McKinsey very long. It was a 3-year stint. I still think that 3 years was, I think about it regularly. I think it influences how I approach a lot of things.
Mm-hmm. So where did you go after 3 years? So 3 years you were at McKinsey. And then what was next?
What was next is I wasn't exactly sure what I was going to do next, and then a couple of things happened. I had there was a very senior director who had retired as a very senior director at McKinsey, who'd been with the firm for 30, 40 years. He was kind of a legend in that world. He was one of the people who could trace his experience back to Marvin Bowers, and like that was a very special thing for people. He took an interest in me because he was very, very involved in the music and art scene in LA. And he had been a very formidable figure in the evolution of the LA Philharmonic Symphony, of the LA Opera, of the programs at UCLA and the arts and the Department of Music. And he just had his hand on a lot of different organizations, philanthropically and from a leadership perspective. And he knew me, and he was always very fascinated that this kid who came out of this literature and theater background had ended up at McKinsey. He found that unusual in a positive way. There were plenty of partners who thought that was unusual in a perplexing way.
Well, it sounds really, I mean, that's a pretty dynamic change. I mean, there couldn't be more stark differences between the arts or the music scene in LA and McKinsey.
Yeah, there were a lot of cultural divides that never really got breached. But
you've never been afraid of that. I mean, culture is something that you've always worn very comfortably.
I think so.
Yeah.
I mean, I do. I always felt like, the insecurity I felt was tempered by the notion of these people hired me. And it was a very long and extensive interviewing process over many weeks, as we all know, right? It was a multi-stage, multi-day, multi-week experience with a lot of testing involved. And my take on it was, I didn't force anybody to hire me, right? I didn't swindle anybody. I didn't lie about anything. I didn't have a connection that forced somebody to hire me. It wasn't like, my uncle was the managing director of that office or something like that. I was so honest in the interviews that I kind of felt like I'm never going to be accused of somehow hoodwinking anybody into giving me this opportunity. So you gave me the job, and now it's up to me to kind of make the most of it, but I never felt uncomfortable about it.
Yeah.
I might not have been comfortable about the work I was doing because I did have these gaps of knowledge, but I didn't feel uncomfortable about the decision they made. I figured that's your decision. That's up to you guys to live with or not live with. In any case, this guy Babatia, who is the gentleman I was speaking of, he kind of wore both hats. He was a very, very, very senior consultant and a career director at McKinsey, and very dedicated, of course, to the firm, but had all of these leadership positions with these arts organizations and loved music. That was his personal passion, he and his family. And so he kind of felt like, you can have both. I get that. I'm maybe more leaning on the business side, and the music side is more my extracurricular passion. It feels to me like you might have the music as more of your primary, and the business is the thing that you've learned on the side. But he said,
thus the shy of 80-hour weeks, right? You said you were not really keen on.
I'm not super keen on that, but for all of us who work in the live music business, your schedule is also, it's a different 80 hours. It's a different way of thinking about that 80 hours, but you don't get into this line of work. A few members of my team are here, I'm sure they'll say the same thing. You're at the office
there's no
at
real
nights,
schedule.
on the weekends, on Friday, Saturday, Sunday. This is when our business takes place, particularly as you also have if you're on the business side of the performing arts business, the world of business happens during the day, Monday through Friday, right? So you kind of have to be in both worlds a lot of the time. So for me, it wasn't so much moving to a different schedule. That was not the goal, but he said to me when I was thinking about what I was going to do next, he said, there's a lot of opportunity for people like you who I can see have an understanding of how organizations are run and how strategy works, and you've been with the firm for a few years. You've obviously learned a lot of how we do what we do. But this whole world around the artists on stage, that's something you should know about. The people who are helping make the artists able to do what they do on stage, whether it be in the finance department or in the publicity department or the marketing department. And these were not things I really knew that much about. So he had given me an opportunity to work on a pro bono project while I was still at McKinsey to help an organization with a lot of strategic planning and a particular marketing question that they were dealing with. And I met some of the folks in that world. You know, one of the advantages that all McKinsey consultants, I think, experience and leverage is even at a young age, you tend to be exposed to and working with pretty senior people in the client organizations in which you work. So that was a great advantage. And when I was leaving McKinsey, he said, you know, there's a gentleman in town who was probably the most important philanthropist for the arts in LA at that time, who was a multi-billionaire entrepreneur who was in his late 80s at the time. And he said, you know, he's putting together a project team because he has two very important projects that he wants to get off the ground. And to make a long story short, this director said, I'm going to lead the team, and I'm putting together a team of business people that I think care about the arts to work on this for a year. And would you join that team? I was like the junior person in this 4-person team. He set it up like a McKinsey engagement. We were working directly for the philanthropist in question. And he said, I want to run this project like I would run it in the office. I'm assembling the team of people that I think have different skill sets that are going to complement each other well. You should be on that team, and we're going to, you know, do this for 12 to 18 months. And I did that, and because it was a very high-profile set of people, I met all sorts of people in the arts. And Bob was really good about making sure that as a 20-something, I was in the right rooms at the right tables. And that was his genius for me. That's what really led me down this path. I thought, you know, I like doing what I'm doing on the business side, and I love doing it in an environment where I think the output is really about strengthening on a really macro level, which sounds, I don't want to try to sound grandiose, but it's about strengthening the arts environment in that community. The artists who perform on stage, whatever the genre might be, they need to focus on the creative part. The people around them can support them by taking care of the business, making sure that the organization is strong, that it's well capitalized, that the balance of all the different inputs that go into making a robust organization are perfectly aligned, so that the musicians or the actors, whoever it may be on stage, the creatives, have the freedom to do what they do. That understanding for me was like the light bulb. It was personally, and I hope I'm not offending anyone in this business, but it was more fulfilling to me than applying those skill sets to the grocery business. Like my last project at McKinsey was on a team working for grocers, and I thought, this is intellectually somewhat interesting, but I'm not sure that I'm personally driven as much by the output.
This almost sounds like the conversation that maybe you had with your parents to convince them that you were going into the arts rather than working at McKinsey. Were your parents excited about you making that transition? Was there anything that you had to discuss with them about your long-term passion for the career
you know,
that
I'll
you
tell
wanted
you,
to pursue?
my parents were super supportive.
Yeah.
My parents were academics in math and business, but they always, from the beginning, had always said whatever my brother and I wanted to do was good. And my dad, I think, actually had more of a personal interest in literature and the humanities than mathematics, but you know, as part of that early wave of immigration from Asia to America in the mid-60s when the laws changed and legal immigration for Asians became a possibility, the priorities were math, science, medicine, right? And so there was a lot of people in my dad's generation who made their professional choices in a very, very practical and a not very emotional way. So I think for us, they absolutely believe that you should follow your emotional as much as your practical. Not maybe in lieu of practicality, but very much on par with practical decision making. So that, and this is very stereotypical, but a lot of my friends of the Indian community I don't know that everyone's parents would have supported this, right? There is a little bit of a truth to the sense of that generation's premium on math, science, medicine, law to a degree. My parents were somewhat unusual in their cohort. Yeah. So they were totally fine with it. They thought it was, my whole family, my brother's a mathematician, engineer from MIT. When I said I got this job at McKinsey, I think they all, combination of like howled with laughter, were very proud. They were very proud, but kind of shocked. They're still kind of shocked that that ever happened in my life, because that was not the plan.
That wasn't the plan.
That was not the plan.
So was there any pursuit in LA? Was there an Indian community in LA? Was that something that you were seeking as you kind of landed as a young person socially?
There is an Indian community in LA. There's an Indian community really everywhere in America. I've always been very seeking. I'm not sure if I would use the word seeking. I've always had a strong relationship with those in my community, for lack of a better word, the Indian American community, the Indian community. I'm a culturally very aware person. My parents, gave us a lot of cultural education. So, in my 20s, I don't know if that I was seeking the Indian community, but I was a part of an Indian community for sure. I think in your 20s, you're seeking community on so many levels.
Yeah.
I think the reason I'm paused is I'm thinking, what wasn't I seeking? I was I was trying to figure out if I'm in the community of the people I worked with, and I thought mostly not. Just from I did not feel a great kinship with a lot of the people I worked with. I had some very, very close friends who I'm still close friends with today, but by and large, I felt a little bit like fish out of water. I was in my mid-20s. These are also, going back to the 90s. Being a young gay man in the 90s was not what it is today. Not that I'm suggesting that it's easy for young people today, but it was less easy then. So I had to figure that out. I was on my own for the first time. I was out of college for the first time. You feel like an adult for the first time. That's obviously a part of being an adult, is growing into yourself. So I was learning on that level. And I was in a new city, in a new community, and living in a very, very big city for the first time. So I think I was trying to figure out if I was that person. I know, there's a lot you're going to figure out in your 20s.
Yeah, I've always been impressed by your authenticity and your comfortableness in talking about your, I've met your husband before. You talk about your culture very comfortably. Talk about different communities of leaving from LA to come to Vienna, Virginia. I live in Vienna, Virginia. It's a very different community than LA.
All the cool people live in Vienna.
Well, so, I think you gave us a piece of the interview that you had when you came to Wolf Trap. Were you expecting to get the job then? You said you weren't expecting to get the job at McKinsey. Was this a job that you were, I used the word seeking before, was this a role that you were seeking because of the philanthropy effort, of the nonprofit nature of Wolf Trap? What was why do you think the folks who hired you, why did they hire you?
Well, by the time I got this opportunity, the in-between of leaving McKinsey and coming here is I started this journey in LA working in the live music and in the non-commercial, non-profit part of the live music business. And I had run the Hollywood Bowl for a decade at that point. I had also been the COO of the Los Angeles Philharmonic, so I was very heavily involved in both live music on a pretty broad spectrum, because at the Hollywood Bowl we programmed very, very broadly, but also very involved in the orchestral world and the philanthropy of the arts and arts education. So my professional life at that point had really come to fruition. It had become clear, and then it had become focused, and then I had created a career path. So working at Wolf Trap was not so much of a left turn as it was when I left to go to McKinsey. So I did not feel in coming to this job that there were skills about the job that were going to be very new, because at this point the job and the job I had before had a lot of overlap. What was intriguing to me about coming here, I've been in the live music business at this point, 10, 15 years. I knew all of the big summer festival folks around the country because we all know each other, just like any sector. You know the people who are in leadership in your field, and it's not a very big world. And our peer group were, if I was at the Bowl then, it was Wolf Trap, Tanglewood, the Ravinia Festival outside Chicago, the Mann Center in Philadelphia. There's, probably 5 to 7 organizations that I would say have enough in common that we feel a kinship. And so I knew all the leadership, and I knew what Wolf Trap was all about. I was intrigued by Wolf Trap for a couple of reasons. As much as there's commonality in that group, that's all nonprofits, it's all broad programming, it all have a big education focus. There's only one national park for the arts. Wolf Trap has many of the characteristics of these other organizations, with the added dimension of it being our nation's national summer festival for music. And we can talk a little bit more about what that actually means, but that origin story.
Let's delve into that a little bit. Especially as a national park, like what does that do in terms of your mission for Wolf Trap?
So, a lot of us in the non-commercial performing arts sector believe that we should present music on a very wide spectrum, and it doesn't always matter if each individual concert is commercially viable on its own, because we're trying to support art forms that otherwise will not survive, and we're trying to create environments where young people and young families can expose themselves to art and art forms that otherwise wouldn't be available to them if you made it a purely dollars and cents commercial activity. There are certain kinds of art that have always been supported by philanthropy, going back to the very beginning of those art forms. And we believe that those art forms should exist, and we believe that there should be easy accessibility for all people to interact with music and the arts. That's why we're non-commercial. That's the only reason we're non-commercial. Mm-hmm. The business that we operate looks, feels, runs like any other commercial opportunity to see a concert. What we do with the money that we make or raise is different in the sense that it doesn't go back to an owner or to shareholders. It goes into supporting accessibility to concerts and music that otherwise would not be available. Yeah. That's everybody in the nonprofit arts sector. Everyone in our region, that's everyone in the country.
But one of the first questions I asked my team when we first got started with our sponsorship, and this has been going on for 20 years, but it's only been 5 years under my leadership. I asked Sonia, I said, why can't we hang like our PNC flag above our summer season sponsor? And it was because of the national park. And you made it very clear to me, we're not Jiffy Lube, right?
And I don't say that as a knock to Jiffy Lube. Those guys do a great job doing what they do. It's a different business. And their interests and their guiding principles are going to be different than ours. What you just articulated goes back to this notion of the national park. So if all of us in our sector are essentially operating in the same framework of taking the financial results of our work, whether it be earned revenue or philanthropic revenue, and applying it to accessibility, education, and supporting different art forms, we can all say that. What is different being the national park for the arts? So our organization, for those of you who don't know, we partner with the National Park Service and the Department of Interior at the National Park for the Arts. They are the stewards of the land and the buildings. These are all federal assets. We are their partner that does the programming, fundraising, marketing, commercial activity. But at core, we are the ones who do the arts. We're the programmers of the stages, all of our stages, and all the arts education. Why do we have a national park for the arts? This question comes to me from time to time. If you think about the National Park Service, Their remit is actually to be the stewards of the fabric of American culture. We generally attribute that component of their work to the management and protection of these great national lands that we all think of as iconic in America. Yosemite, the Grand Canyon, all of these great places. We think these are part of what makes America, America. The National Park Service also is the stewards of the National Historic Registry. So a place or a space or an object that is deemed to have been contributing to our creation of America, that is National Park Service responsibility. All of the national monuments, presidential monuments and others, they all fall under the National Park Service because these are all monuments to our historic shared history. The artifacts of the native people are all stewarded and managed by the Park Service in recognition of the native people being part of the creation and the concept of what we know as America today. When our founder, Catherine Schaus, decided to donate her land in the mid-60s and worked with the federal government and the administration at the time, they created the first and only national park for the arts in recognition that creativity and artistry are part of the fabric of American culture. The fact that we as a people celebrate and honor creativity is part of what makes Americans American. This is the noble origin story of why we have a national park for the arts, because we believe, like all other components of the national park's mission, that it is contributory to our understanding of why Americans are Americans. Creativity is part of that American fabric. That was intriguing to me. Thinking about the responsibilities then of programming at the National Park for the Arts, how does that influence our work, to answer your question? My team and I are always thinking about the fact that the park is owned by all Americans, equally and by definition. It's not owned by the National Park Service, it's not owned by the Wolf Trap Foundation. It's stewarded by the Park Service and the Foundation as co-equal partners at that park, but it actually belongs to all of us. It belongs to Americans. So that gives us great clarity in our choices, because we're always thinking everybody in this community has an equal proprietary interest in that land and in that stage. How can we make programmatic choices that makes everybody feel equally part of that experience? I don't think that's a goal that we ever fully achieve, because I think as society grows, changes, evolves, you have to grow, change, and evolve with it. I never get complacent about are we fully satisfying every community, because I don't think we ever are. But that's our goal. Our goal is to say this thing, this concept of Wolf Trap, this land that you're walking on, this really belongs to all of us, and we should all feel the same sense of excitement, relevance, interest, ownership, whatever you define it as, in this experience. That's why we program the way we program. And that's why we are a non-commercial entity. We have members and philanthropists and corporate partners who support this vision of saying, we're going to create a financial picture that allows for that mission to happen. It also means, because we are on federal land and we are in a national park, the parks are non-commercial by nature. We like to keep our national park land somewhat, there's a sense that when you're on that land that the land and the buildings on that land come first, and the recognition comes second. So to answer your question about why isn't there a PNC logo on top of the Feline Center, this is part of the give and take.
Just over one of the pavilions would have been fine. Yeah, it's fine.
I hope that you feel, because I know that our folks all know the PNC partnership, because we find other creative ways to tell that story. But there are some, parameters around working with the government and federal land in these federal spaces that have reason. They come from a place of logic. And we try to honor that relationship, because that relationship is the entire origin story for us.
Okay.
That's why we're set up the way we're set up. We're not set up to be like a Jiffy Lube. Again, they do a great job doing what they do in the lane that they're in. We're in our lane, and our lane has its own set of nobility to it.
So prior to your leadership, despite the fact that Wolf Trap is right in my backyard, I live in Vienna, it's only 2 miles from my house.
Yes.
I had not spent a lot of time at Wolf Trap because there weren't genres that frankly that really appealed to me.
Okay.
And since you've been there, I think the diversity of acts that you've brought in has been tremendous. Let's talk about, was that intentional?
Sure, absolutely intentional. You know, every group of leadership at Wolf Trap is going to have their own point of view, their own bent. We're in the arts. We get to play a curatorial role. I mean, that's part of the awesome benefit and responsibility of my job and my team's job. We get the privilege to do that. Everybody's going to have their own curatorial bent. I saw an opportunity in moving here to broaden what we did. I don't like hearing that people live nearby and have never been. So,
well, no, I said before your leadership.
no, before. Yeah. I mean, I wasn't trying to pick on you.
I'm there all the time now.
Over the years, I've heard many people say that to me. You know, I didn't used to come, and now I come, and there's different reasons why people make that. But I'd like to feel like if I met somebody tomorrow who had your story from 15 years ago, I would try to understand, like, what is the barrier here? Why aren't you coming? Sometimes it's programmatic. Sometimes it's the way the message has been delivered. Sometimes it's an experience that they had once and prohibits them from coming back. Sometimes it's a misperception about a barrier to entry, and I think, God, we really put so much effort into having low barrier to entry that if somebody feels that way, it's on us to then maybe figure out why is that message not landing.
Right.
But yeah, I'd like to think of the seasons at Wolf Trap, whether it be at the Feline Center or at the Barns, as having relevance to everyone. It's a very old-fashioned approach to business in that sense. It's the opposite of find your niche and own your target. Like, we'd like to think that our target is potentially everybody. That's not the way you would set this up. If you were doing this on a commercial level, you would set up a festival with a narrow focus. You'd figure out what was missing in the market. You would go after that target. You'd own it. You'd have all of your messaging be very focused on that target or on your segment so that you would own your target. We like to think that it belongs to everyone, so why shouldn't everyone feel like there's something there for them?
So anyone would have thought, like, coming out of COVID, a venue like yours, an outdoor national park venue, 7,000 patrons, potentially would have been dead. But you came out of COVID, raised $75 million, 6 new pavilions, made improvements to the Feline Center. You have more patrons today than you did, I believe, before COVID. What is it about your leadership that's led to you being so successful?
I like your talking points. These are good. These are good. You should make you a spokesperson.
Yeah.
We did come out of COVID strong, and we're very grateful for that. I think a couple of things. You mentioned a lot of investment. We did run a campaign that we were launching in conjunction with our 50th anniversary, which was 2021. Of course, COVID, that launch got very complicated because the year prior became very desolate. But we still did launch, and I think that there's such a strong feeling of support and commitment around this, around Wolf Trap and in this area, that we're very grateful for the fact that we were able to. We've launched our 50 million campaign for our 50th anniversary, and then ended up raising 75 million, and we're putting that money back into experiences.
You got $25 million before you got to the 25 years of additional years.
That's true.
Yeah. Again, you're a spokesperson.
But we're putting it into the park. You mentioned a number of new facilities and amenities to make the experience better and fresher. We're putting it into endowment to help make sure that our education programs, our artist development programs, our programs related to accessibility so that everyone can feel that Wolf Trap is in their sights. Endowment is the way to make sure that these things are permanent and supported. I think that I learned a lot during COVID, like we all did. I learned a lot about our patron base because I saw so many of our patrons and members absolutely stick with us, even when we weren't able to, in 2020, put a lot of in-person experiences together. We did a lot of things virtually like everyone did. But when I would talk to the patron base, when we did have occasion to have either over Zoom or sometimes in big outdoor public gathering safe spaces, I kept hearing from people, we've had a relationship with this place for 20 years in our family. We don't want this not to be here on the back end of COVID. We don't know when that's going to happen, right, especially in 2020, but this is part of what makes living here really great. So we're going to stick with you on the understanding that you will come out of this, and then when you come out of this, we're all going to come back. Our first year, 21, we were partially open, and 22 was our single best year on pretty much every metric we could look at in our history. And I will tell you, we were not so certain coming out of 21 how quickly we would get back to pre-pandemic levels, because I thought there may be some, lingering hesitation. You weren't sure if you've broken a pattern with people, and sometimes it's hard to rebuild the tradition. But in 2022, people came back kind of blazing. And it's been kind of like that ever since. So we're really pleased about that, but also very grateful that my team has heard me say this so many times that I'm sure it gets boring for them. I really believe strongly we do not want to be thought of as simply a transactional destination. We are a destination where transactions happen, of course. We sell tickets to events. But we want to be, our goal is for people to see us as a community resource, something that's made either their experience or living in this region better. We're not the only one. I'm not naive about that. There's a million great institutions, but I'd like to be thought of as part of those institutions that contribute to the creation of a society. In the same way that parks and schools and places of worship and healthcare and community centers, these are all the things that help a group of people that live near each other turn into a society or a community. And when I think about the hundreds of thousands of people who come through the gates every year, and then over time, the hundreds of thousands, if not millions of children who have been in classrooms that are working with us in education programs, I'd like to think that there's a large group of people out there who would say, Wolf Trap has made my experience of living in the DMV better.
Well, it certainly has for me, and I'm sure for our audience here as well. I'd like to open it up for questions. Wow, we have a number of folks who would like to. No, go right ahead. You can give the mic to.
I think Wolf Trap is amazing, except for getting out of the parking lot after the show. But are you under the radar enough not to have happened to you what happened to the Kennedy Center?
There are a lot of structural differences in the way a lot of these organizations are set up. And our board structure is very different to the Kennedy Center board structure and how it's governed and populated. So I feel like we're all in the arts and we do have boards. Not all arts and boards are set up in the same way. So I think that there's a structural difference there.
I'm curious, because you're a national park, have you been impacted, and how have you navigated the national park scenarios occurring across the country?
The question was, as partners with the national park, how have any changes or developments over at the parks side impacted us? The parks departments, we work very hand in glove with them in essentially jointly executing on the promise of the season. Their part of it is really about managing the land and managing the facilities, not entirely, but in large part. And so when you come to Wolf Trap, you probably will remember you'll see a lot of rangers, a lot of volunteers, a lot of people on the ground who might be helping with getting you from point A to point B, for lack of a better way to describe that. Most of the park staff that you encounter in the summer are seasonal ranger hires, right? They have a very small full-time staff, but they have a very large summer staff. If you were following some of the staffing questions related to the federal government over the last few months, clearly there are different levels or layers of impact across all departments. One of the things that happened over the last 6 weeks was the Department of Interior, though, really put a premium on making sure that all the seasonal hiring at parks continued. There was a little bit of a pause while there was some uncertainty about what was happening with seasonal hiring. That had been resolved, and they are very much in full swing with all their seasonal hiring, which is a wonderful thing, because the seasonal hiring at the Parks Department really does make or break so many parks. And in our case, because we're generally open on a seasonal basis, they're much more heavily weighted towards seasonal staff. And I think that that's going well for them. So, we keep an eye on that. We're monitoring. Our relationship with the park through its leadership is very close. And, our organizations have worked hand in glove for so many years. It's hard sometimes to even know where the line is because we're working with each other so much. We're there to be a helpful partner. I think all partners at parks across the nation are very much feeling that call to duty more than ever. I work with a lot. I'm on the board of the Public Lands Alliance, which is an alliance of partners of public land agencies around the country. One of the things that unifies all of us, because we have very different kinds of parks that we work with, is a sense that the private community and the philanthropic community is here to help the parks and public land community always. This has been true for decades. I think this year we feel that sense a little bit stronger. We might need to be, we might be called upon in new ways to be helpful, but that's kind of part of why we do what we do. We believe that public-private partnership makes a stronger entity for the public to enjoy.
Hi, Arvind. Thank you so much for sharing your story. My curiosity is around the mentorship and sponsorship. You mentioned in the beginning that you had 2 mentors in the beginning. My question is, what kind of conversations do you have with them? Do you still keep in touch with them? And how often do you keep up with them?
In one case, frequently, because we're still very close. And that mentorship really was, we were closer in age, so we're a little bit more of peers. She was older than me, but not so much older than me. But the other gentleman I was talking about was 3 decades older than I am. So that relationship is not quite as active. I do talk, whenever I meet with my interns, we have a very large internship program. We have a national internship program where we call upon people from all backgrounds to work at McKinsey, college kids, but in every part of our operation, finance, HR, as well as programming, production, anything to do with the support of the business. I always say to them that I think people our age, now if I think about myself and older, I think we're generally hardwired to be supportive of younger people. I didn't look for mentorship. I was not focused in that way. I hadn't read the book, and I hadn't been to the class where they were like, make a list of people that you want to be your mentor and go approach them. I didn't do any of that. But I did have, thank God, like the presence of mind to understand when this gentleman, for example, took an interest in me. I thought I should really be paying attention to what is happening here, right? Like this is happening, and I think he's trying to open doors for me, and I need to like sit and listen to what he's talking about and learn from this. I say to young people now, keep your eyes and ears open. Be the best you can be, because I think older people, we look at 20-somethings and we see that spark and we think, oh, there's somebody who's got something interesting going on there. We want to be helpful. We don't mind being, people always ask me, well, how do I ask somebody for advice? It's like, we love that. I think it's few and far between when you run into people at our age or older who have had some success in life, who are so closed in their heart that they don't want to answer a question that might help a younger professional, become a better version of themselves. There probably are those people, but broadly speaking, we like to be helpful. And I don't know that everybody at that age really fully appreciates what that opportunity really can mean. There's people around you that not only can help you, but actually would like to be helpful.
All right, one more question. Actually, 2 more. We'll do 2 more. One here and one here in the front row.
I wonder if you could just speak to the connection between the opportunity and the responsibility that you feel currently, given, I thought your answers were very politically astute given the current environment, but the region's in crisis. I think it's safe to say. So are there ways in which there are opportunities when your core mission, I would argue, is being challenged at the top of the nation's leadership? So can you speak to that at all?
I can speak to the opportunity. If you believe, as I believe, that our role in the sector, not just locally, but in the sector, is to be a place that brings people together. Why do people go to live events? If you go all the way back, let's go back 5,000 years to the ancient Greek. Why is this happening? People do this because there is something about us that is part of our core, which we like to have a communal experience. Why hasn't technology destroyed the live music business? We all can listen to music at home in higher fidelity than we ever could in an outdoor environment. The live music sector thrives every year because people want to do it together. I have always believed, and I've seen in even in my career, previous times of turmoil, let's say even just economic turmoil, right? People still come to concerts because in some ways they crave that. When I talk about being a community resource, part of that, there's many different dimensions of that. Part of it is, I believe that people from all different stripes come to Wolf Trap. They sit with each other, they have an experience, they share something in common, even if it's only for a period of time. They also, to a large degree, have an opportunity to remove themselves from the day to have a point of time where they have some mental peace and clarity. I believe that in the best of times. So my take on that is, at any time, or if you are feeling turmoil, we need to be that resource. And we need to be steadfast about it, and we need to make sure that we don't retreat from that in any way. I want to show strength and double down on our commitment to having as broad a spectrum of music as possible on stage, to make it as welcoming as possible, to make the experience feel as safe as possible, and to have as few barriers to entry as possible, so that anyone, for whatever reason, and maybe more so than usual this year, somebody might be saying, holy shit, I need to get out and go to that symphonic event and listen to that piece of music and bring some clarity to my head. We need to be there for that. We always feel that way. I don't think that changes this year. If anything, it makes our resolve very strong.
All right, one more question here, and we're going to have to wrap it up.
Actually, you kind of, Ibrahim Mukmin, you kind of answered it, but I'm just happy that your vision and leadership is doing what it's doing. This time last week, I was in Charlottesville, and I had the opportunity to go to Monticello. And it had been about 20 years since I've been down there, and I was so happy to see how now in Monticello they have discussions about the enslaved people, some 100 people that were slaves to Jefferson there. And your vision of making sure that this park is accessible to everybody is wonderful. And I'm hoping that you continue to do that, and hopefully, because you're part of the Park Service, nobody curtails that. I just wanted to just say that.
I thank you for that. We believe the same, that it should be accessible to all, of course. At the moment, things are going very well with our partnership. And I think this summer is going to be, for all of us in the music business, we talk across the nation, I think the summer is going to be very important for all of us to, like I said, do what we do and do it in the way that we've always done it. Because whenever there's uncertainty, people cling, they want to go to the places where they feel supported and safe. And music, art, culture, even if you think of it, it can be pure entertainment. It could be the nostalgic night where you're reliving hits from the 90s and having that night. It could be a ballet. It could be an opera performance. It can be an R&B show. It doesn't matter what the genre is. Ultimately, it is a an experience that I think people crave because it makes them feel better inside. It's not the only way that we can feel better. I don't ever position the work that we do as unique in that sense, but it is part of a holistic experience. So we will continue to do what we do, and we will continue to do it in the way that we always have. We obviously don't want to see any changes on that front, as you mentioned. And I actually think that the summer's going to be, I feel a little bit like in 2021 when people came back to the park after COVID, and there was an extra sense, it wasn't just the excitement of going to the show, it was an extra sense of I really need this. I really need this experience. And we know as staff members and stewards of that park, that is an awesome responsibility, and it makes us feel like we have to really perform, we have to deliver.
So this could be our COVID 2.0, and I would tell you that Arvind, through your leadership, you have brought a very positive communal communal experience, both to PNC and also to our community. So we thank you for that, and thank you for your leadership.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Thank you for having me.
No, of course. Thank you.